What's up, everyone? Dan here, Crypto Capital Venture, December 5th, 2018. I hope you're doing well. Bitcoin. There's one question on everybody's mind. Is it going lower? It's really the most important question, but it's the most impossible to answer. So before I start this video, I just want to let you know, nobody knows the answer to that. The best thing to do is be prepared. In this video, however, we're going to look at the charts. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I like to start off these videos zoomed out, whether on the daily or the weekly. So here's a daily chart zoomed out, and you see this fluid, harmonious, really nice looking movement of Bitcoin. And it's ironic that it's nice looking because the volatility of Bitcoin is strong, but it is harmonious and nice looking regardless. And just that consistency of this movement, right? We have the cycles of Bitcoin. We have these parabolic moves. We have these corrections, massive parabolic moves, massive corrections. Now, we have a consistency in the movement of Bitcoin, which is very important because as we zoom in on the charts to the daily, to the 4-hour, we can look for similar consistencies in how Bitcoin likes to move. And that's what we're going to do. And from doing that, we can get some clues to at least mess around with a possible answer of what direction is Bitcoin going next. So let's do that in this video. So obviously, as I mentioned, we're zoomed out on the daily chart right now, going back to 2013, and you can see we're very much trying. I mean, Bitcoin's just doing whatever it's doing, but we're hoping, right, for a bottom. Much of the market is, unless you're shorting Bitcoin, which many people are shorting Bitcoin. They think it's going lower. But we obviously are trying to see if $3,500 will be a support area, right? Right now, Bitcoin right under $3,800 on this chart, which is Bitfinex chart. So let's hop over to the daily. Some things I want to talk about. We're going to focus our attention right now, for the sake of this video, on March 30th to April 12th area, and what we're going to do is take that area and see and really watch how Bitcoin moved in terms of, first off, it was overextended from the 200 EMA. It was overextended around 28% from the 200 EMA. Big area of accumulation if you're looking to buy a dip. And secondly, we traded a little bit in this bottom channel, which Bitcoin often does for a while. And we had these higher lows for a little bit. And then we actually finally had a break and a pullback up to the 50 and the 200 EMA. So the reason I'm highlighting March 30th to April 12th is just because there are some similarities to what Bitcoin is doing right now. And you can see I've drawn lines that you can see every time Bitcoin has kind of had an overextended bounce back up, you can see it kind of did the same thing with these higher lows, and then finally it has a nice move up. At least a pullback to the 200 EMA in that area. So Bitcoin has done that time and time again. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Second thing, and we're going to zoom in on the 4-hour on these exact time frames. We're going to also compare it to where we are now. But the second thing I do want to take note of is the supports that we had at this bottom here, right, before we got a pullback. I want to take note of what the area looks like on the stock RSI, because this is important. This is very important to look at. So you can see when we hit that bottom right here, we had this oversold area, right? But we didn't get a huge, balance in terms of price, even though we did get some upward momentum on the stock RSI, right? We actually didn't get the nice move in price until, let's see, we were already in the overbought area right here. So that's something very important to take note of, because I know a lot of people when they look at the stock RSI, let me move back here. When they look at the stock RSI, they're thinking, well, there's no way that Bitcoin, if we're already in the overbought area, there's no way Bitcoin can make a move at this point. But that's inaccurate. The stock RSI is a faster moving momentum oscillator, and you really have to take it with a grain of salt, and you have to be careful. You can't always look at the stock RSI on the daily chart and say, okay, it's in the overbought area, time to sell. You cannot do that. And I just want to throw that out there. I mean, you could do it, and I just deleted the stock RSI indicator by accident. So that's great. So let me try and bring it up real quick. Okay, so it's there, but it's just at the bottom now. So we got it back up, and that's just something I wanted to point out. So be careful if you're looking at the stock RSI. If you're looking for a quicker, or a more long-term momentum oscillator to look at, you definitely always want to look at the RSI. And in terms of that, you can see where we are in the RSI right now. So let me get my brush. Right now we are hugging support at the oversold line exactly. And so that leads me to my next point that I want to make. When we had this bounce in March to April area off of this bottom here, you can see Bitcoin doing the same thing in terms of the RSI, right? Hugging this bottom area. And you see this support line that oversold line held for Bitcoin. And that's the 30 line on the RSI. Many of you know I like to use the 40 line on the RSI to really help us define bull versus bear market and bull versus bear momentum. But for the sake of this video and for the sake of the RSI, I think the 30 line is really good for context as well. And then the other thing on the daily chart I just want to point out is the MACD. So when we had this bounce off of this little bottom here and this pullback to the 200 EMA and the 50 EMA, you can see Bitcoin on the MACD getting its cross, right? So we had a cross on the MACD, and interestingly enough, in terms of where Bitcoin was approaching this first bottom that we're talking about right now in the April-March area, you can see the histogram, right? You can see the kind of the movement of this MACD is very similar to the movement of the MACD here. So we see a shifting in terms of momentum, very similar to that time frame. So I'm not trying to be extremely bullish here, but I just want to point this out. A move to the upside at this point is extremely possible. And based off of historical data of Bitcoin, this type of setup has happened many, many times. And we just saw it. We just saw it using the momentum oscillators, and we just saw it using the higher low type of range that Bitcoin has formed. Now, speaking of the higher low range, let's look at what that looks like. And that's not, so here we go. Here's the 4 hour in that time period. So that higher low range that we were just talking about, looking at on the daily, looks like this in terms of Bitcoin in that time frame. At the same time Bitcoin was doing that, this is the 4 hour, by the way, you can see it had some lower highs, and we formed like this symmetrical triangle, right? So whenever there's a symmetrical triangle being formed, we're always looking for a potential breakout to the upside as well as the downside. Now the breakout, you can see the height of this triangle, the formation of this triangle would essentially be the height of the breakout target. And you can see the initial breakout of this symmetrical triangle, it really was accurately hit. And you can see what we did was we broke through the top of the triangle, we hit through the 200 EMA, or I'm sorry, the 50 EMA, this blue line, and then we actually broke through the 200 EMA and found support above the 200 EMA. This is the exact type of move on the 4 hour chart that the bulls need to see on Bitcoin right now. So one thing I want to point out before we pivot to the current 4 hour chart is this. When we had these lower highs right here on Bitcoin, you kind of saw this area of resistance at the 50 EMA. And then the third time we got to this 50 EMA, we actually broke through it. Now let's look at where we are now. It's very, very similar. A bullish pattern in formation, which is this falling wedge, right? So instead of the symmetrical triangle, we do have the same type of formation, which is this falling wedge, right? And when I say same type of formation, what I mean is a kind of a bullish formation, potentially. So we have these lower highs now, and we have these lower lows in this falling wedge. And right now we're actually touching the lower part of this wedge for the third time. And this candle, this 4 hour candle that we're in right now, is actually an important candle as I do this video, because this is either going to play out bullishly or it's not. Because remember, in this 4 hour chart back in March, when we got that break and that pullback, you can see this third time we tested the 50 EMA is when we broke it, right? So taking that evidence and applying it to where we are now, you can see we have one touch failed at the 50 EMA to stay above, two touch failed above the 50 EMA. Now, the question I have on the short term for you and for me and for everybody watching is, are we going to get a pullback up back to the 50 EMA at the very least to 4,000? And this is the biggie. This is what to look out for now in terms of, is Bitcoin going lower or higher? Are we going to break the 50 EMA? If we see resistance for this third time testing the 50 EMA on the 4 hour, I'd say be very careful if you're bullish right now, because a rejection at this area around $4,000 right now is definitely not a good thing. You can see what it looks like in a bullish scenario. It's a good thing to break through that 50 EMA after 2 touches. So similarly, it would be a very good thing if we can break through it on a 3rd touch, break through this wedge, and then you can actually see in terms of the wedge on the daily chart, we'd have a breakout target of around $4,600. On the downside, if this wedge fails that we just looked at on the 4-hour, we have a breakout of around $3,200 on the downside. So obviously it's a falling wedge. You know, they can tend to be bullish. However, in bear markets, it almost doesn't matter. In bull markets, it's a whole different story when you're tracking a falling wedge. But in bear markets, it really is tough. It really is tough to tell. But they can be bullish, and we've seen it time and time again. So that's really the question. And a few questions we have is, will Bitcoin hit that target? Right? Is it going to hit it on the upside? And that's something we need to track. But the very first thing we need to track is if Bitcoin is going to test this 50 EMA on the 4-hour around $4,000. $4,000 is that magic number if we get a little bit of a run. And for context to that, you can see Bitcoin right now with where it's trading, that's around 7.5% to the upside. So we can totally have a 7.5% gain today, tomorrow, whenever to test this area. But I would say definitely keep an eye out for that to see what happens. And also at the same time, keep an eye out on the momentum oscillators as we did just talk about, right? Here's the RSI with that support for is this the 3rd time at this oversold area? Support there, support here. Will it hold? This is really the bottom of this falling wedge that we just tracked. It's that type of area. And this is on the daily chart on the RSI. So the question is, are we going to get a little bit of a bounce here to kind of head back up, test the top of that wedge? And then lastly, we can look at the MACD on the same daily chart, right? Let's see what's happening with the MACD right now. So you can see we have this MACD on the daily chart. We have the MACD line crossing the signal line and a little bit of a leveling off, right? We didn't get a major bull run where the blue line is just kind of going up. A little bit of a leveling off. So it's a nice momentum oscillator to really keep track on, the MACD, and you can definitely keep track of that. So these are some things I'm looking at, but again, I'm really taking the 4-hour chart and I'm finding the similarities of just one of these bottom ranges, these dip ranges for Bitcoin. At the end of the day, I know that we could certainly go lower, right? If we break the bottom of this 4-hour wedge right here, we're going to be testing critical support extremely quickly, right? $3,500 in that area is really the true test on the downside. So again, if we do break down, keep an eye out on that area. But these are my thoughts. As you know, I'm accumulating and I am prepared to accumulate lower. I don't know what your approach is to the market, but my best advice to you is not financial advice. It's just the advice to be careful and not spend more money than you can afford to lose. But if you play this right in the long term, I think you will be just fine. Time will tell for us all. Those are my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in terms of Bitcoin. I know a lot of you out there think Bitcoin's going lower. I'm really curious to know what you think. Let me know. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. I would love to have you as part of the channel. I appreciate all of you for coming by. I will see you in the next video, and God bless.